Welcome back to Investing Talk podcast. Today we're looking closely at Rigetti computing and, well, really the whole quantum computing space. Given some recent developments, you shared a bunch of articles focusing on Rigetti itself, the wider industry, and this big investment deal in the Middle East. Our mission today is to unpack all that and figure out what's most important for you to understand right now about this fascinating and pretty complex area. So, Rigetti computing. They're definitely a name that pops up in quantum. Maybe start us off, what's their core business?
Okay. Rigetti Computing. They've certainly carved out a space for themselves in quantum. Their model is quite interesting. They're building what they call a full-stack quantum classical computing platform.
Full stack, meaning
They're involved in, well, pretty much everything, from developing the actual quantum processors, the core hardware, all the way up to the software layer that lets people, access and use that quantum power. And what's notable is they've offered cloud access since 2017. That was pretty early on for this field.
Okay, so cloud access early on.
Correct. Their main focus is building these quantum computers
Yeah.
using superconducting circuits for their processors. And they're aiming to serve clients globally, really across any field that has these incredibly tough computational problems to solve.
Right. That full stack plus early cloud access gives them a specific niche, I suppose.
Okay.
Let's talk about their recent financial health. We have the Q1 2025 numbers. What jumps out at you from that report?
Looking at those Q1 financials, there are a few things to pull apart. First, their revenue came in at $1.5 million. Now, that's quite a drop from the $3.1 million they posted in Q1 of 2024.
A significant decrease.
It is. But then you look at net income, and it shows a positive $42.6 million.
Whoa, that sounds great after hearing the revenue number. What's the catch?
Well, the catch, or rather the context, is that this net income figure includes a very large non-cash gain, about $62.1 million. This comes mainly from changes in the value of things like derivative warrants, so it's not directly tied to their core operations selling quantum computing services.
Okay, so financial engineering more than operational profit driving that number.
That's a fair way to put it for that specific gain. And if you look purely at operations, they had an operating loss of $21.6 million, with operating expenses around $22.1 million.
Right. Still spending quite a bit more than they're bringing in operationally.
Exactly. But on the positive side, their cash situation looks strong. End of March 2025, they had $209.1 million in cash equivalents and investments. And that actually grew to $237.7 million by the end of April.
How did it jump like that in a month?
That was largely thanks to a recent investment they received from Quanta Computer.
Okay. So it's a mixed bag financially. Revenue down, net income looks good because of non-cash items, high operational spending, but a very healthy cash balance thanks to investment. What would you say are Rigetti's main strengths right now, and what are the biggest red flags we should be watching?
Based on what we've seen, a key strength is simply being an established player, a pioneer, really, in this quantum field. They've been at it for a while. And that strong cash position, boosted by the quant investment, is absolutely critical. It gives them runway for R&D in a very capital-intensive field.
Makes sense. And the red flags?
The obvious ones are the high operating expenses relative to their current revenue. That gap needs to narrow eventually for sustainability. And as we discussed, the reliance on non-cash gains to achieve net income. You want to see the core business eventually driving profitability.
Definitely things to monitor. Okay, let's zoom out a bit. What's the general feeling, the sort of market sentiment around quantum computing right now? And who are the big competitors Rigetti is up against?
The general feeling is, well, it's potential mixed with caution. Everyone sees the enormous long-term possibilities across so many industries. But it's still very early days. The technology needs to mature significantly. So that means it's viewed as a pretty high-risk investment area overall.
High risk, high reward potential down the line.
Precisely. And in terms of competition, Rigetti is facing some giants. IBM Quantum, Google Quantum AI Lab. These are names backed by massive resources.
Tough neighborhood. Does Rigetti have a specific edge they're trying to leverage?
Their stated edge seems to be that focus on hybrid quantum classical computing, trying to blend the best of both worlds, and also their established cloud platform, aiming for accessibility. That could be a differentiator if they execute well.
Okay. Now let's talk about that big external event, the investment news out of the Middle East. Specifically, this Quantinuum Qatar deal. What happened there?
This was quite significant. We saw a $1 billion investment from Qatar's Al Raban Capital go into Quantinuum. Quantinuum, just for context, is the company formed when Honeywell Quantum Solutions merged with Cambridge Quantum Computing. Honeywell is still the majority owner.
$1 billion is serious money in this space. What's the goal of that investment?
It's aimed at accelerating quantum tech development and also building up a skilled workforce in the U.S. The joint venture itself has specific goals. Developing quantum applications focused on regional needs in the Middle East. They're talking about things like designing new materials, precision technologies, genomics research, and financial services innovation, all kind of tailored for that region.
Interesting regional focus. And this was part of a much larger picture, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
This quantum deal was one element of a huge tour that reportedly saw over $2 trillion in deals announced across defense, aviation, and AI in Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and the UAE.
$2 trillion. Wow. Okay, so back to the quantum deal. How did the markets react? Specifically for Honeywell, Quantinuum's parent, and then for Rigetti. Sounds like it wasn't the same reaction for both.
It really wasn't. Interestingly, Honeywell's stock actually dipped slightly, maybe 0.6%, despite this apparently positive news for its subsidiary.
Huh. Any idea why?
Hard to say definitively. Could be broader market factors. Maybe the news was already priced in to some extent, or maybe the market just sees it as a longer-term play that doesn't affect Honeywell's overall massive business much in the short term.
Okay. But Rigetti?
Rigetti saw a completely different reaction. Their stock surged, jumped about 18% right after the Quantinuum announcement.
18%. Just based on a competitor, or rather another company in the sector, getting investment.
That seems to be the interpretation. Investors likely saw that huge $1 billion investment as a major vote of confidence in the entire quantum computing sector. That positive sentiment seems to have lifted other boats, like Rigetti's, even though they weren't directly involved in that specific deal.
Sector-wide enthusiasm spillover.
It appears so. And adding to that, we saw the analyst firm Craig-Hallum raise their price target on Rigetti from $12 to $14, keeping their buy rating.
So the tide lifted their boat quite significantly. You mentioned this was part of a much bigger Middle East investment push. Can you give us a sense of the scale of those other deals?
The scale is, well, pretty staggering. Beyond the quantum investment, Qatar also committed $10 billion for U.S. military facility, $42 billion for weapons systems, and a huge $96 billion deal for Boeing jets.
Wow.
And the UAE wasn't quiet either. They announced over $200 billion in commercial deals, including major investments in AI infrastructure within the Emirates. Plus, the UAE has stated this goal of investing $1.4 trillion into the U.S. economy over the next decade, targeting AI, semiconductors, energy, manufacturing, key areas.
Just massive capital flows. It definitely puts that billion for quantum into perspective, as significant as it is for the sector. But you also mentioned some conflicting signals, right? Even with all this investment excitement, there's some skepticism.
Yes, and this is a crucial counterpoint. Despite all the hype and these huge investments pouring into fields like AI and quantum computing, reports indicate that stocks in these very sectors are among the most heavily shorted on Wall Street right now.
Really? So lots of bets against them, too.
It suggests a significant amount of caution, or perhaps outright pessimism, from some investors about near-term performance or current valuations. It really highlights the speculative nature of investing in these advanced technologies. The long-term dream is there, but there are clearly worries about how long it will take to generate real profits, the intense competition, and just the sheer amount of money needed to succeed.
So a lot happening, both positive signals and underlying caution. Okay, let's try to synthesize this. What does all this mean for you, the informed learner, trying to make sense of it all? We've seen Rigetti is definitely a player in this nascent, potentially revolutionary quantum field. Their financials are, let's say, mixed. Strong cash reserves, which are vital, but also significant operating losses, and that reliance on non-cash gains for net income. But the bigger picture, the investment landscape, especially that huge influx of capital into the sector highlighted by the Middle East deals, seems to signal growing confidence in quantum's long-term future.
That seems right. And the way Rigetti's stock jumped after the Quantinuum news really underscores how these major sector investments can create ripples, boosting sentiment even for companies not directly involved.
Yeah, it's a reminder that in these emerging tech fields, external factors and just general market mood can seriously influence individual company valuations, maybe even more than their current quarterly results sometimes. Which leads us to, perhaps, the key question going forward. How will Rigetti use this increased attention, this maybe improved market sentiment, alongside its own tech progress to really solidify its position against those big competitors?
That's the question to watch. Can they translate the potential and the current cash buffer into sustainable operational success?
Definitely something to keep a close eye on. If you found this exploration useful today, please do make sure to subscribe, like this session, and maybe leave us a comment with your thoughts. We always appreciate you engaging with us and look forward to unpacking more information that matters to you next time.